Well, if you're watching or listening to this, congrats. It just means that you made the fantasy playoffs because, I mean, why else would you be listening or watching a fantasy football podcast at this point? You'd just be off somewhere in the corner crying, right, Dave? Welcome to the other side, everybody. It's time to get that win here in round one of the fantasy playoffs. Dave, Kluge, and I are going to take a look at the week 15 waiver wire. As always, I'm your host, Alfredo Brown. And if you are listening to this podcast on Apple, guess what? We got a giveaway. All right. We are giving away a full-sized NFL football autographed by Denver Broncos running back Javonte Williams. All you have to do, leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcast, send that screenshot over to me on Twitter at the Pretend GM, and we'll be announcing the winner on our award show. That's right. The Pretend GMmies, the annual award show, once the fantasy playoffs have ended. All right, Dave, let's get to your first waiver wire ad of the week, and it is Kansas City Chiefs running back Jerick McKinnon, who, if I'm not mistaken, Dave, he was the running back one this week. Just insane 2-touchdown performance, and I don't think this was the name that a lot of us were expecting to talk about here on Monday.
Certainly wasn't the name I was expecting to talk about, because just last week I was talking about Isaiah Pacheco as a great pickup, and I think
right.
The process was right there. We just had the wrong player, unfortunately. And if you look at it, Isaiah Pacheco is technically the lead back. I mean, he's getting the majority of the touches, but all of the high value touches, which are what we care about so much in fantasy football, are going to Jerick McKinnon. He is out targeting Isaiah Pacheco 12-15 over the last 3 games without CEH. That first game without CEH, they really tried pushing Isaiah Pacheco into a red zone role, but he was pretty inefficient with it. And over the last 2 weeks now, it seems as if Jerick McKinnon has usurped all of those red zone touches. He is out touching Isaiah Pacheco in the red zone 8-2. So he's getting almost all the targets, and he's getting almost all of the goal line and red zone work on a very explosive offense. Over the last 3 weeks, he is PPR's RB3 behind only Christian McCaffrey and Tony Pollard. And yeah, that's coming off of 3 touchdowns. That's probably going to come back down to earth a little bit, but he is out targeting, out snapping, and out touching Isaiah Pacheco. And that is something to take notice of. Now, Jerick McKinnon's a name that you've probably heard. He's been in the league for a really long time now, but he's had a bizarre career path. He lost 2 full seasons where he didn't play at all with an injury. He was kind of the Robin to Adrian Peterson's Batman during his time in Minnesota, and never really carved out a big
Batman
role for himself
reference.
there. A Batman reference. I got you here. And then he played with San Francisco for a year, but when he was there, he was behind Raheem Mostert when he was healthy, and then Jeff Wilson was the number 2, and never really got to do much throughout his NFL career. And then he signed with Kansas City at age 29, and has just had this late career resurgence. But coming into the league, he was elite across the board. 40-yard dash, speed, burst, agility, strength, all inside the 92nd percentile. He's 5'9" and 209 pounds. He repped 225 pounds on the bench press 32 times. This dude is a beast, one of the strongest pound for pound guys in the NFL. And now he's got the trust of his coaching staff on an explosive offense. I really think that for the rest of the season, both Isaiah Pacheco and Jerick McKinnon are going to be startable. You look at this schedule, they get the Texans, the Seahawks, and the Broncos over the next 3 weeks. You could start Isaiah Pacheco and Jerick McKinnon, but Jerick McKinnon with those high value touches, I think he has a higher floor and a higher ceiling. So absolutely love this pickup if you're able to get him.
Yeah, I wonder with Jerick McKinnon, how much of that production there was the Chiefs kind of they got out to an early lead, right? And actually, as you tweeted, that the strong point of that Denver Broncos defense is their secondary, right? So you want to attack them with the run. It was just to me, it was really interesting that it ended up being McKinnon. It almost felt more of like the coin flip that he happened to be the guy that got those long plays. How comfortable are you with starting him? I know you said that, he's obviously a great waiver wire ad, but how comfortable are you really starting him against, teams like the Texans? Like, what happens? Do you think it's possible he gets scripted out of these games, or has he kind of secured a role where he's going to be in there no matter what?
I think he's going to be in there because something I didn't even talk about is that he is also a phenomenal pass blocker. So if you watch on passing downs, Isaiah Pacheco is almost never on the field. And he's going to get somewhere between 15, 20, 22 carries every single game. But what can you really expect from that? I mean, Isaiah Pacheco has been effective on the ground, but even if he's averaging 5 yards per carry, if he isn't stumbling into the end zone, it's going to be really tough for him to salvage his fantasy day. Jerick McKinnon, with those targets and the red zone work, just has a sky-high floor and ceiling, it looks like. So even though Pacheco is technically getting more touches, the value of the touches going McKinnon's way are so much higher. And then you look at the age too. He's 30 years old now. So, they probably just didn't want to ride him for a whole season, but it seems like when the game is on the line and they need a running back on the field that they can trust, it seems like McKinnon has been that guy for the last 2 years. And now we're just seeing a little bit longer of a leash with CEH out. All right, Alfredo, we know that Garrett Wilson has been red hot for the New York Jets, but why don't you talk to us about another wide receiver over there, Elijah Moore?
Yeah, today I'm in mourning. If you're watching on YouTube, you see that I am wearing kind of a Jets green hoodie. It's a brisk 65 degrees here in South Florida. My Dolphins lost. It's just the worst of days. And here I am recommending a Jets wide receiver, Elijah Moore. He's only 27% rostered in Yahoo leagues. And we saw this past week, Corey Davis left the game with a concussion, likely to miss week 15. That's just something that we've seen with players that have to leave a game due to a concussion. And he was ruled out immediately. This wasn't like, oh, we'll see if he can come back. He was ruled out immediately. When you see that, players miss at least 1 week. And then we've even seen kind of that special case where Joe Mixon missed multiple weeks. So anything is possible here when it comes to the Corey Davis concussion protocol. But Elijah Moore, he had 6 catches for 60 yards, team leader on targets, 10 targets in last week's game. And it's not like he's just some scrub, some guy that we've never heard of, where it's, sorry, no shade, but I'm kind of going to throw shade. Like, it's not like he's Chris Moore of the Houston Texans, where you're like, let me go get that guy. Like, Elijah Moore was a stud last year. He was a top draft pick, and this was a guy that a lot of us had big expectations for. And for whatever reason it may have been, the Jets just haven't been able to put this thing together. And all of a sudden now, under the tutelage of Mike White, the passing game is coming together. So I do think that there is some potential here for Elijah Moore. And if you need a wide receiver 3 kind of flex streamer for next week, Moore becomes a pretty viable option. And the Lions, they've given up 51 PPR points per game to opposing wide receivers over the last 4 games. You can slice that however you want. Garrett Wilson's not going to get 51 PPR points all by himself. Elijah Moore has got to be able to do something. But what stood out to me with the way, at least for this matchup this week against the Lions, is that it has specifically been against slot wide receivers. Okay, slot wide receivers are averaging 17.5 PPR points per game over the last 4 weeks against the Lions. We're talking about Wan'Dale Robinson going 9 for 100, 19 PPR points. Isaiah McKenzie with 96 yards and a touchdown. Christian Kirk, 104 yards. And then KJ Osborne this last week getting 5 catches, 38 yards and a touchdown. So that is double-digit fantasy points from all 4 slot wide receivers over the last 4 weeks. And guess what? Elijah Moore now had a big role change. He's going to be in the slot. He's been in the slot a lot more. I believe it was over 70% of his snaps taken out of the slot receiver position starting back in week 13. So this isn't a new thing. This has been an intentional change. Even with Corey Davis being out, Elijah Moore is going to stay in that slot. And they're probably going to be working in Denzel Mims, who got to see a lot of action on the outside after Corey Davis left. So we could see potentially a big game, one of those blow up games from Elijah Moore that it's you're going to see all the posts on Twitter, like raise your hand if Elijah Moore went off on your bench this week, right? Like that's what you could see this week going up against the Detroit Lions. And even going forward, the Jets have the 4th easiest remaining strength of schedule for wide receivers in the fantasy playoffs. The upcoming matchups, obviously we talked about Detroit, but then they've got Jacksonville and Seattle. So these can be some very pass heavy games, bad secondaries, and actually some opportunity for Elijah Moore to help your fantasy team in the playoffs. But don't forget, so much of this streamability for Elijah Moore comes down to the health of Mike White. I'm not going to really feel comfortable starting any Jets receiver, even the great Garrett Wilson. Maybe Garrett Wilson. I'm iffy on that. But if Joe Flacco is a starting quarterback in week 15, I get a lot more nervous about a Jets wide receiver.
Yeah, I mean, if KJ Osborne could slice up this defense, I think that Elijah Moore should do just fine. Like you said, he's got 2 games over his last 3 where he's eclipsed 60 yards. So I think that he's heating up at just the right time.
All right, Dave, at this point, I feel like we kind of just have to rebrand this to the Donovan Peoples-Jones show, because if I'm not mistaken, we have talked about Donovan Peoples-Jones probably for the last 5 weeks on this show in some format or another, as either a trade target or a waiver wire ad. And he's just still one of those guys that for some reason or another does not get rostered in enough leagues. He's only rostered in 58% of Yahoo leagues. So Dave, we saw Donovan Peoples-Jones just bust out onto the scene last week with Deshaun Watson at quarterback. Why is Donovan Peoples-Jones one of your waiver wire ads for week 15?
Well, I mean, it's redundant. Like you said, we talk about this guy every single week. I've been talking about him for years, but like you called out, he's still only rostered in 58% of leagues. So until that roster ship gets up, I'm going to keep talking about him because this guy just keeps producing and nobody wants to listen for some reason. And don't get me wrong, Amari Cooper's the wide receiver 1 there, but Donovan Peoples-Jones has been fantastic this year. Talked about it last week that he is an elite athlete. I mean, truly elite. We're talking 100th percentile burst score. This guy can jump higher than almost anybody in the league, sub 4.540, and he does all of this with a monstrous 6'2 frame. The only reason he wasn't a premium draft pick is because he lacked some refinement when he was coming into the league. And because of that, he slid down to the 6th round. And he was a project, no doubt about it. He did almost nothing his rookie year. He started to show some signs last year of being a downfield field stretcher. But now in year 3, he is suddenly developing into a very well-rounded receiver. And the burst and the speed that we talked about was still there, as evidenced by the punt that he ran back 2 weeks ago. Now his target totals dropped a couple weeks ago in that first game with Deshaun Watson, but that was just a horrendous outing for Deshaun Watson.
Right.
He did not look like himself whatsoever. We saw him finally start to cool down a little bit yesterday, and he looked comfortable in the offense. And wouldn't you know it, Donovan Peoples-Jones saw a career high 12 targets in that game. He also saw a career high in yardage. And just like I said, I expected him to get a little bit more comfortable. And I thought that Donovan Peoples-Jones would be the biggest beneficiary here, very similar to the Will Fuller role that we saw during his time in Houston. And that's exactly what we saw yesterday. So we know that he's got this really great speed where he can get deep and blow the top off the defense. So he's got that big play upside every single week, which gives him a very dramatically high ceiling. But now that he's starting to win on the intermediate and the shorter parts of the field, he can also work as a safety valve for Deshaun Watson. He's averaging almost 7 targets per game since week 4. I mean, the usage has been there. Earlier in the season, he had 7 straight games with 50-plus yards in a row. Now, he got dropped by a lot of people a couple of weeks ago because he had those back-to-back duds. It's going to be a little bit harder to get him now after this breakout performance, but he's got matchups against Baltimore and Washington throughout the rest of the season, and those are going to be favorable matchups to him. The one that looks like a not so favorable matchup is against the Saints. But the reason that they haven't been giving up a lot of points to wide receivers is because Marshawn Lattimore, when he's in there, shuts down the wide receiver 1. We expect him to shadow Amari Cooper in that game, which should leave some extra opportunities on the table for Donovan Peoples-Jones. Like you said, he's still available in almost 50% of the leagues out there. I just simply don't understand why. This guy's been a plug-and-play wide receiver 2 pretty much the entire season, and you can still go out and pick him up in almost 1 in 3 leagues.
Yeah, I think coming off of this great performance last week, I think you're going to find him rostered on a lot more teams going into the playoffs, especially some of those teams that maybe tried to like stash Deshaun Watson for a while. And there's a few things to consider here, right? Like Amari Cooper was dealing with a hip injury, if I'm not mistaken. And we don't know if that has maybe even gotten any worse or how long that's going to linger around. So there's even a shot here that Donovan Peoples-Jones becomes the top wide receiver target on this team if Amari Cooper does continue to deal with this injury. And with Dave, the weird thing for me that I've noticed, and as a Nick Chubb fantasy manager, I have noticed this, and it's been very upsetting, is that the Browns have really not been running the ball as well or as often. And it almost seems like they're trying to say, okay, what can we do to get Deshaun up to speed faster? Because they know this year's a wash, and it seems almost like, okay, maybe we don't want to, crush Nick Chubb here at the end of the season. Let's get Deshaun some reps. Let's get this offense some reps, and let's get them ready for next year. That's what it looks like to me.
Yeah, and I thought that that's what they were going to do last week. I thought that against Houston, that would be a great opportunity for them to really run the ball, slow things down, and getting comfortable. But for whatever reason, they've just been letting him rip. And even when doing that on an offense that has no dearth of talent, with a pass catching running back like Kareem Hunt, David Njoku playing out of tight end, and like you said, Amari Cooper, Donovan Peoples-Jones was still the target leader by a landslide last week. The chemistry that he has built with Deshaun Watson is already apparent. Absolutely love him as a start every single week going forward. Alfredo, we saw a little bit of boom from this guy last week, but I think that there's still some more meat on the bone for the rest of the season. Why don't you talk to me a little bit about Chig Okonkwo?
Oh man, Dave, this is a player that there's been real excitement about. Me, everybody on Twitter, your buddy Adam Koffler was out here exclaiming that Chig Okonkwo was going to be a top 5 tight end this week, and I was like, all right, I like Chig Okonkwo, he's good, but let's approach this with a little bit more realism. Maybe he'll be top 12. Wrong. Chig Okonkwo comes out and he was a top 3 tight end last week. I'm getting excited. I'm changing all my fantasy team names. Chigosaurus Rex, Chig Papa, getting Chiggy with it. Chigtoria's Secret. Like Chig Okonkwo is the light that we have all needed at the tight end position here in fantasy football. It's been such a darkness this season. The tight end position has been so bad. And those of you that just maybe you squeaked into the playoffs and you've been looking for that missing piece in your starting lineup, it seems like Chig Okonkwo could be that guy, because we've gotten to the point, Dave, and you tell me if you disagree, but tight end has gotten so bad that I feel like you literally have nothing to lose. Like, just take shots on these guys, especially athletic tight ends. How often do we talk about that in the offseason, that the guys who end up being studs at the tight end position are the insane athletes? Right? Like, you never see a guy that's a top producer at the tight end position. You're like, oh yeah, he's kind of a plotter. He's really good at blocking. He's very well. Like, no, man, it's always these guys that are excellent athletes, catch the ball well, run the ball, run their routes properly, get open. Over the last 3 weeks, Chig Okonkwo has shown he can do that. He's been the tight end 3. That tells you what the tight end landscape is like. Okay, he's had 5 or more targets in 3 straight weeks, 40 receiving yards or more in 4 of his last 6 games. The excitement around him, it just stems from this incredible athleticism that he has. Okay, he had the best 40-yard dash amongst all the rookie tight ends, which was actually a pretty athletic bunch, and he ran a 4.52. There's a reason that when you see him on the field, he looks like a wide receiver. Okay, that athleticism shows up for him. He's leading all tight ends in yards per reception. He's leading all tight ends in receptions of 40 yards or more. He's 5th in yards after catch per reception, and he's 4th in yards per target. So the athleticism is showing up. They're targeting him deeper downfield. When he gets the ball, he can make a move. And that's the kind of upside you look for in a tight end. You're not looking for the guy like the Mike Gesicki's previously Zach Ertz, who catches the ball 8 yards downfield and just falls down. You want a guy that can break these long runs. And the fact that a player who has not been a full-time starter leads all tight ends in plays of 40 yards or more is outstanding. The only small thing, sorry, I'm choking over here talking about Chig. But the only thing that gives me a brief moment of pause is that he's had just one game over a 50% snap percentage. So silver lining here tells me maybe it just gets better because he's going to get more playing time, or maybe we see more of the same, and you really got to hope for these plays where he can pop off. So he's getting more usage each week in 11 personnel, meaning that just one tight end on the field. And even if he does happen to like crash back down to earth, right? Tight end has gotten just so annoying, where there's no difference between him and guys like Pat Freiermuth, Dawson Knox, Greg Dulcich, dare I say, George Kittle, Mark Andrews, guys that are like not even in the top 12 amongst tight ends over the last 3 weeks. So yeah, it's just, if you can get a tight end playmaker, Chig Okonkwo is going to be one of the big names in the waiver wire this week.
Yeah, love everything you said there. And this is another one where we kind of had the right process last week and just had the wrong player. We were saying to go out and get Treylon Burks, and for a lot of the same reasons that we like Chig Okonkwo. And unfortunately, Treylon Burks had a brutal injury that knocked him out of that game. And now the opportunity has just opened up for Chig even more so. So love this call. And I was with you. You know, I liked him, but I was pumping the brakes ever so slightly. I kind of ranked him as a back end tight end 1, but man, he smashed last week and he looked great. So happy to see that they were able to fill the shoes that were vacated by Jonnu Smith.
All right, Dave. So this is a player that the two of us love. We've been talking about him all off season, all throughout the regular season. And guess what? He's back, baby. Khalil Herbert, running back, Chicago Bears. He is 36% rostered in Yahoo leagues. And Dave, he should be coming back off IR.
Yeah, I mean, the practice window should open up this week. There's no guarantee that he comes back, but we are still looking at such big upside here that even if he's not coming back for another week or two, you got to pick him up and stash him right now. I was actually digging into the numbers this morning. I knew this guy was good, but I was blown away at just how efficient he was this season. He is the league leader in yards per attempt among all qualifying running backs. Most rushing yards over expectation per attempt among all running backs. I mean, this guy was literally the most efficient running back when he was healthy. And we've talked about it time and time again. David Montgomery is good at what he does. He's great at breaking tackles. He's good in the open field. But if we're looking at a pure runner, somebody who has vision and patience and the ability to find those holes in offensive lines, that's exactly what Khalil Herbert does, and he does it really, really well. Now, obviously, David Montgomery has gotten much more volume. He's been healthy longer. He is the lead back. He dominates in snap shares. But looking at explosive plays of 15 or more yards, I was kind of shocked by this. Khalil Herbert is outproducing David Montgomery on 4-1 on almost half the amount of touches. And Chicago right now is, as we know, averaging more rushing plays than anybody else in the NFL, 34.6 rushing plays per game. So this is a very healthy ecosystem for a running back to absolutely flourish in. even if David Montgomery is healthy through the end of the season, which there's no reason to anticipate that he won't be, there's still going to be opportunity for Khalil Herbert to put up weekly flex value in your fantasy football lineup. In the 2 games without David Montgomery, though, that's when we saw this apparent ceiling. And oh my goodness, he averaged 21 touches and 135 scrimmage yards per game in those 2 outings. And over the last 4 weeks before Khalil Herbert got hurt, we started to see him force a little bit more of a timeshare. Over those final 4 weeks where he was playing great, he earned snaps and he was getting 11.3 carries per game, even with David Montgomery on the field with no limitations whatsoever. So we're looking at a running back who has elite efficiency. He's getting a decent workload. He's on a great team situation for a running back, and he has massive contingent upside if something were to happen to David Montgomery. Still available in 2 of 3 leagues. He is my number 2 priority right now after Jerick McKinnon, who we talked about a little bit earlier. And we've talked about it with David Montgomery. I'm going to talk about it again right now. But we saw the Lions get shredded last week through the air, on the ground. I mean, this defense has been absolutely terrible. Week 17, that's who the Bears face off against. So you're looking at somebody you can plug in as a high upside flex player, regardless of David Montgomery's health. And if for whatever reason David Montgomery isn't playing in week 17, you're looking at a potential RB1 in Khalil Herbert.
Yeah, I don't know if we can overstate this enough, but it's handcuff season. Right. And there's very few handcuffs or let's call them whatever, backup running backs, whatever you want to say, that can also present standalone value. And Khalil Herbert is one of those guys. And, it's interesting. I know the Lions have actually been getting better despite the fact they were carved up through the air, but they have been getting better, at least from a run defense standpoint. But I think that the thing that's going to be different here when it comes to the Bears and the way that they run things is that there's not a lot of quarterbacks like Justin Fields. Okay, defenses have to account for his rushing ability. And I think that's something that makes the Bears running attack just so absolutely dangerous. So Khalil Herbert, I mean, he still remains in that RB, like that low end RB2, probably high end RB3 flex category, even if David Montgomery is healthy, Dave. So I do like this one. And if anything, literally anything happens to David Montgomery, like you said, Khalil Herbert becomes a league winner.
Alfredo, Trevor Lawrence has been heating up these last few weeks, and it looks like Zay Jones could be one of the biggest beneficiaries.
Yeah, man. Zay Jones, of course, he does it the week that I'm not talking about him. But when I make him my start of the week, he's just like, no, I'd rather just not, put up points against the Detroit Lions. So that's cool. Zay Jones, like you and I were supposed to be like homies. We were boys. This is what you do to me. So Zay Jones right now has looked great from this week. For week 14, he's going to be the wide receiver 7 in PPR. Okay, we're saying this before Monday Night Football, so anything could change, but this isn't like a one-off thing. This isn't even maybe like 2 out of 3, right? Like Zay Jones since week 10 has been the wide receiver 15 on a points per game basis. So he's actually just been good consistently. He's a top 24 PPR wide receiver in 3 of his last 4 weeks. So a little bit bigger sample size. And like you said, Dave, Trevor Lawrence, man, it is just insane. He's playing on a whole new level. Like this is what we all expected from him. I think we all we got excited about Justin Fields and the rushing ability there. And, even previously, talking about Mac Jones playing well in his rookie season. And finally, we're seeing what made Trevor Lawrence that number 1 overall pick. And he has looked really, really good. 9 passing touchdowns over the last 4 games. And it's not just that he's playing well. The Jaguars are winning games, and they're doing it on his shoulders. And in that same 4-game span that Trevor Lawrence has all those touchdowns, Zay Jones has a nearly 29% target share. It's like 28.7, something like that. And to find a player in an offense that's thriving right now, that's passing the ball this much with a good quarterback, getting a nearly 30% target share is just, that's not typically available out on the waiver wire. I think it's just so much as that it's the name, it's the team. Like, I don't know what it is that it's Zay Jones on the Jaguars, and we don't trust it yet. But right now, over the last 4 weeks, Zay Jones, he's been 8th in receptions. So the target volume's there, the receptions are actually there. And guess what? He's 8th in receptions despite actually playing 1 less game than everyone else in the top 5. So who knows where he'd be if he's on that same playing field. The only thing that worries me just a little bit, just a wee little bit right now, is that he's got one of the worst upcoming schedules for a wide receiver. He's got Dallas Cowboys, New York Jets, and Houston Texans, who, courtesy of our buddy JJ Zacharyson on Twitter, you follow him at Late Round QB. He wrote this earlier today that the Houston Texans have not allowed a top 12 wide receiver fantasy performance since Michael Pittman in week 1. And it's one of those weird, like it's like an enigma type of thing. What came first, the chicken or the egg? Or like, are the Texans actually good at defending wide receivers, or are they just so bad at everything else that the teams don't have to throw a whole lot of passes? I'm going with the latter, right? But if Trevor Lawrence can keep things up and he can keep passing the ball well, the Jaguars can stay in games and be competitive, right? Like the Dallas Cowboys, they got thrown on by the Houston Texans, and the Jets are not, they're not necessarily like the all world defense, but they've been pretty damn good. So Trevor Lawrence is going to come up against some tough opponents here. But if Trevor Lawrence can keep it up, I think Zay Jones kind of remains in that low end wide receiver 2, high end wide receiver 3 range. Jags are just going to have to prove they can keep up with some of these good defenses.
Yeah, and now, Alfredo, I'm just going to go talk a little bit about the history here for a quick second with Zay Jones, because a lot of people just started playing fantasy football within the last few years and might not know, but Zay Jones was a top prospect coming into the league and had a really rough go during his time in Buffalo, where he had some mental health problems. He actually almost had to retire from the league in his early 20s. He was able to come back. I mean, it's been quite the comeback story. I think a lot of him playing in with the Raiders and linking up with Darren Waller, he talked about how that kind of helped him with his mental health, and Darren Waller has also helped Max Crosby and other guys on the team. But we are looking at Zay Jones now finally living up to the bill as that second round pick he was drafted in 2017. I just checked this morning, he's 27 years old right now, and he just set his career high in week 14. So despite a slow start to the season, despite a very rocky start to his career, he is finally coming to form and showing exactly why he was a second round pick 5 years ago.
All right, Dave, it looks like we are in love with the Jaguars right now. And as we both mentioned, so much of it stems from Trevor Lawrence, but we're going to talk about another pass catcher on this team, and it's Evan Engram, or also known as the tight end 1 here in week 14. Evan Engram went off. If I'm not mistaken, this was a career day for him, I would assume. Talk to everybody, aside from the career day, why you are in on claiming Evan Engram off the week 15 waiver wire.
Well, Evan Engram was a guy that I was really touting this offseason, have him on a ton of my rosters, but guess where he was last week? On my bench in almost all of those rosters, including 45.2 points in Scott Fishbowl. Yeah, really, really tough week to finally bench Evan Engram. But I'll just talk again. I just talked about the history with Zay Jones a little bit. Allow me to talk about Evan Ingram's history a little bit. He had the 5th most yards by a rookie tight end in modern NFL. And he did that on 115 targets. I mean, again, we talk about how some people are new to fantasy football. Evan Engram was Kyle Pitts 5 or 6 years ago. I mean, people fell in love with this guy, said that he was one of the greatest generational tight ends ever to come into the NFL. And from then on, after that rookie season, it just wasn't really looking too great. I mean, he had injury after injury after injury. The New York media turned on him. The Giants team was awful. He had these really publicly scrutinized drops in crucial games that lost them games. And he just never really had a fair go in New York. Now, it's his first year out of New York, and he is averaging the most yards per game since 2019, which was, like I said, cut short by a foot injury, which was just kind of the theme of his entire tenure there with the Giants. And after that foot injury, he saw a massive dip in production. And then in 2021, last year, he was pretty much phased out of the offense, which I don't even understand why they ever picked up that 5th-year option just to not even throw the ball to him. But I saw him as a guy to target this offseason because of Doug Peterson. Doug Peterson loves his tight ends. During his time in Philadelphia as their head coach, he ran more 2 tight end sets than anybody else in the league. And you can kind of look at it and say, well, maybe it was the talent that he was playing with. Yeah, I mean, Doug Peterson was lucky enough to have Travis Kelce, Zach Ertz, and Dallas Goedert. But guess what? This offseason, he wanted to build a similar personnel, and that's why he went out and paid big money for Evan Engram. That's why he brought Dan Arnold in. He loves to run these 2 tight end sets, and Evan Engram is on the field for almost every single snap. It's been pretty boomer bust so far this year for Evan Engram, but over the last 2 weeks, 22 targets and 3 touchdowns. That is just mind blowing to see from the tight end position. So again, kind of like what you were talking about with Chig Okonkwo, there aren't a lot of guys that you can feel good about right now plugging into your tight end spot. Unless you have Travis Kelce, you're probably feeling pretty shaky about that tight end. So why not chase the upside? And right now the Jaguars are red hot. Historically, Evan Engram has struggled with drops, but he is looking at his best drop rate right now since 2019. And really, all of his metrics are up since that 2019 season, which seemed to almost kind of shatter his confidence. And he was just not the same player in New York. everything is trending up. Yards per reception, yards after catch, drop rate, touchdown rate, target share are all looking better than they have over the last 2 years with the Giants. You already talked about how Trevor Lawrence was heating up a little bit, but over these last 5 games, he's averaging 272 yards per game. He has 10 touchdowns and 0 interceptions over that stretch. So Evan Engram is an elite athlete. And right now, there isn't really a clear-cut 1, 2, or even a 3 in Jacksonville. Right now, Evan Engram, Zay Jones, and Christian Kirk are all just kind of operating as the top guy, and there isn't really a clear-cut hierarchy. So Evan Engram could continue to have these boom games. He is still available in entirely too many leagues, 56% of leagues, which means that he is available in almost half the leagues out there. He's a guy that you can pick up and put into your tight end slot for week 15.
Yeah, Dave, something that you mentioned there is just the athleticism when it comes to Evan Engram. And if you're not looking for elite athleticism, if you're not looking for upside at the tight end position, then you're doing it wrong. At this point in the season, you're not going to win these games against good teams in your league in the playoffs by going for the safe guy that's going to get you 2 or 3 catches. You want to have these tight ends that present elite upside and high production, guys that can run after the catch, players like Evan Engram and Chig Okonkwo that can get open even deep down the field. They can get used in the screen game. So this is where the mindset needs to be when looking at the tight end position, especially at this point in the season. This isn't the time to play it safe and get cute and try to remember when people were like, oh, well, the Jaguars still have Dan Arnold, so I don't know how much Evan Engram we're really going to see. Like, don't be that guy, okay, or girl, or any fantasy manager. Like, just go and look for that high upside potential when it comes to the tight end position.
Yep. I played the safe play this week in a lot of my leagues, Alfredo. You know who that was? Foster Moreau. You know how many points he got me? 0. So go for the upside. All right, Alfredo, we've talked about running backs. We've talked about wide receivers. We've talked about tight ends. Who is a quarterback available right now that you think people should be going out and picking up?
Man, so this is another name. It feels weird. It almost feels kind of like the Donovan Peoples-Jones thing where Daniel Jones has been talked about as like, this is finally a year. He's playing well. He's fantasy viable. I'm not saying that he's going to go out there and be a top 5 quarterback, and you shouldn't be using him to replace guys like, Justin Herbert, Josh Allen, top tier players, but he's definitely a streaming quarterback. This is for that fantasy manager that maybe lost Lamar Jackson, and you obviously can't trust Tyler Huntley, especially with the health situation going on there. You can't trust guys like Tom Brady. You don't know what you're getting out of players like Aaron Rodgers. Like, there's a lot more question marks at the quarterback position this year than we really thought. Even players that we thought were good, Tua Tagovailoa, like we thought that we'd be more comfortable. And now, yeah, I know I brought that up on myself. But Daniel Jones, the guy, he's only 55% rostered in Yahoo leagues. And since week 10, Daniel Jones is the QB9 on a points per game basis. And I don't think that's just something that we're used to seeing or saying. It's very similar to the Zay Jones thing. It's just like names that don't become synonymous with fantasy success, and we just leave them there. We leave them there in that box. And this isn't like a fluky thing. He's quarterback 10 on the season. He's been good. And this isn't something that we've had to say, well, he doesn't throw a lot of touchdowns. He doesn't have to. He's thrown 12 touchdowns on the year, but you know what he's not doing as much? He's not throwing as many interceptions as he was before. He's not fumbling the ball like he was before. He's only thrown 4 touchdowns over the last 4 weeks. He's not giving you the passing value that you might need. The thing with him is that he gives you that rushing floor. That's what makes him so valuable. He's actually top 5 in rushing yards and rushing touchdowns amongst quarterbacks. So he's right up there with some of those big names. He's got 548 rushing yards in the season and 5 touchdowns in the season. And then going forward, at least for this week, it's maybe not the best matchup on paper going up against the Commanders, who their secondary has gotten better as the year has gone on. Initially, that was like the juicy matchup. But the Commanders have been really susceptible to rushing quarterbacks. We've seen that with Justin Fields, Dave, going for 88 yards. Jalen Hurts getting himself 28 yards and a touchdown. Marcus Mariota, who just got benched for a rookie, went for nearly 50 rushing yards. And then, oh yeah, by the way, last time the Giants and Commanders played in that awesome Week 13 tie, go USA tying, Daniel Jones, 71 rushing yards there. So there's already a formula that works for him. He's a good enough streaming quarterback for those of you that need him. And you look ahead to week 16, Daniel Jones plays the Vikings, who just got carved up by Jared Goff. They're allowing these 6 most fantasy points to quarterbacks. So yeah, Daniel Jones goes from being the guy that we're all making fun of to potentially the guy that is a very viable starter during the first 2 rounds of the fantasy playoffs for managers that, well, they need an alternate at the quarterback position.
Yeah, and I mean, wasn't the hope this offseason that Brian Dable was going to go into New York and implement a similar offense to what they saw in Buffalo? And if that all happened, Daniel Jones was going to become Josh Allen, right? Well, of course, Daniel Jones isn't going to become Josh Allen because Josh Allen is ridiculously talented, but Daniel Jones is seeing more yards, rushing yards per game than he ever has. And he has as many rushing touchdowns this season than he has in his previous 3 years combined. So thank you, Brian Dable, for unlocking Daniel Jones as a viable fantasy quarterback.
All right, that is it for us. We gave you our week 15 waiver wire. Once again, congratulations, all of you that have made it to your fantasy football playoffs. We're hoping that you get that week 1 playoff victory, making it to the next round. And we're actually going to be back later on this week. We're going to be starting a new series of episodes here going into our starts of the week. We know you need it now more than ever here in the fantasy football playoffs. So later on in the week, we will be giving you our starts of the week. For Dave Kluge, for myself, we'll see you next time. Adios.